Said Professor Wadiongo was recognized for, quote, his distinguished and courageous literary work and his defense of African languages based on the notion of language as a culture and collective memory. And true to his long-standing campaign for vernacular language, Professor Wadiongo accepted the award in his mother tongue of Kikuyu.
Kiheo giki Premi International ni kiahutia ngoro yakwa na njira nyingi.
Now, in that short clip, the professor was thanking the president of Catalonia and those attendants and saying that the award had touched his heart in a big way. That translation courtesy of my director, Robert, and our sign language interpreter tonight, Njoki Chege. I did not do that. Now, in past interviews, Professor Wadiongo has defended speaking in his local language as a way of empowering Africa by making Africans understand that they needed their own resources, including their language. Well, that informs our discussion tonight on whether here in Kenya, vernacular languages have taken a back seat to the official English and Kiswahili languages, and how they can remain relevant, especially with the younger generation. Now, before we get to the conversation, let's take a quick look at Kenya's language tapestry. Now, though Kenya's official languages are English and Kiswahili, more than 60 different languages are indigenous to Kenya. They fall into 3 language groups. Those are the Cushitic, Nilotic, and Bantu groups. Now, the Cushitic speakers include those from the Somali, Rendile, Borana, Gabra, and Orma communities. Historians say the Southern Cushitic language was the first of all present-day Kenyan languages to be spoken in the country. Now, the Bantu language group includes the Western, the Central, Eastern, and Coastal. Now, the Coastal Bantu include the Mijikenda, Taveta, Pokomo, and Swahili communities. The Central Bantu-speaking communities include the Kikuyu, Kamba, and Meru, while the Western Bantu include the Luya, Suba, Kuria, and Kisii. Now, the Nilotic-speaking people in Kenya include the river and lake Nilots, the plain Nilots, and the highland Nilots. Now, Kenya has only one river lake Nilotic people, the Luo, and the highland Nilots speak the Kalenjin languages that include Nandi, Kipsigis, Elgeyo, and Tugin. Now, the plain Nilots include the Masai, Teso, Samburu, and Turkana. And with such a diverse tapestry of languages in Kenya, are we keeping them alive, and particularly the younger generation that will be the reason these languages stay alive? Should our schools teach vernacular languages? Well, I had a conversation with Mariga Thoidi, who wrote about the relevance of vernacular in this day and age, and Sarah Mwaura from the ACK Language School to explore these linguistic queries. Take a look. Get right into the discussion. Thank you so much for joining me. Sarah, let me begin with you because you head the ACK Language School and of course, taking people through various vernacular languages from where you sit. Yes. And in terms of the response from the general public to these services, have you seen that people are appreciating a need to kind of preserve vernacular languages, and that's why they want to come to you to kind of spruce up on mother tongue?
In terms of the enrollments that we have in those departments, the need is there.
So what's the main reason that people say they come to you, for instance, to learn mother tongue? Is it they're coming from a different community and want to learn a new one, or they're trying to really improve on what they already know?
There are several reasons why clients seek our services. There are setups where you find children born into intermarriages.
Yes.
So the father comes from this community, the mother from the other community. So for a while, they feel a bit disoriented because they don't know which language.
Right.
So they'll pick on one, either from the paternal side, and decide, I need to identify with this language, and that's why they'll enroll. There are some children also, for one reason or another,
Yeah.
their parents relocated to other countries.
Right.
So when they come back here, they want to connect with their other relatives. So they feel the need to begin learning as soon as they can.
So who would you say make up most of the students? If you're looking at demographics, is it mainly young people, children, or adults? What are you seeing?
What I'm seeing mainly are the children.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
So this is being necessitated by parents because the kids are not bringing themselves to the classes, which is interesting because, Mariga, I saw you tweet about this some time back.
Yeah.
And just kind of looking at the relevance of mother tongue now, and especially in the current generation, I'm talking about quote unquote millennials, do they see a need to keep on with mother tongue from what you've seen and observed in conversations and whatnot?
I think it happens, but it happens for people a bit later. So
Okay.
for most people, it happens in their late 20s. It's a very interesting change because like, I grew up in a household where my dad is Kikuyu, my mom is Kamba, but we only spoke English and Kiswahili in the house. So none of us, and including I think my cousins, in all general senses, speak our mother tongue. And so it became a very interesting conversation of how it's lost. So I came to a realization I need to learn it. Time has been an issue, but it's always now it's come back to finding my identity. It's a question which you always you don't realize the importance until a bit later on. Because earlier on it didn't matter. You grew up in Nairobi, you don't need your mother tongue. You're in your rural homes, once a year at most, and people accommodate you.
Yeah.
But after a while, on your own, people start figuring it out. And that's where most people have come to the point that they realize that they want to know it. The bigger question for most people is the why. So beyond identity, the bigger problem is people are trying to figure out the economic viability.
Yes.
Which is an interesting way to look at a language.
Right.
Because that, again, is looking at it through capitalist eyes and not assuming that language has any other inherent value apart from the monetary value. So people are still a bit confused because people want to learn it, but they're saying, if I learn Kikuyu, I learn Kamba, I learn Dolo, where will I speak it? What will I do with it anyway if I've survived all my life without it?
You mentioned something really important, identity. And I want to kind of stick to that a bit because at what point did you realize, oh, wait, there's something missing if I don't know mother tongue, be it in the Kikuyu or the Kamba side? When did it kind of resonate for you?
It resonated in 2015 after my dad passed away. And so there's a whole walking down the path and realizing, okay, what do I have left? Who am I? And going back to that, and I realized that that's the one thing I couldn't connect with. There's a power in connecting with your own people in their own language, which I felt like I've missed out on for a while. Most times you can ignore it, right? People will poke fun at you here and there, but nah, you come back home and you move on with life. But at a certain point, I think I started to understand, I started to learn a bit of it. I started to understand why people prefer speaking in the mother tongue.
Yeah.
The way in which people express themselves is English lacks the vocabulary to fully express many things and many experiences. And the experiences don't just go towards social experiences, go towards mental, physical, and emotional experiences and spaces in time that you are in that you can't express using a language that isn't yours. And so my journey started there, trying to figure out who I was and walking along that path. And I feel like very many people at this point have started learning their mother tongues, late 20s, early 30s, which would be ironic because most of them, in fact, it shocks most parents because most parents would never assume that they'd do it because they'd never actually stay in a rural home for more than a week or two. Exactly. I feel like there's always a need that comes up. Yeah.
It's interesting, Sarah, as you're listening to Mariga and what kind of prompted him to want to learn vernacular or his mother tongue. When you look at your generation, what role did it play? How important was it? You know, and I'm sure that's all people spoke at home.
Yes.
How important was it for your generation? And even now, when you're looking at the one that's coming, what are your thoughts?
Basically, every household spoke its indigenous language. So the environment was, there was no other option. And whether it was functions, initiation rites, weddings were conducted. Because basically we were kind of in the village setup, for example. If it's this community, it's that community. So all the functions conducted in that particular language. So it was easy. Schooling. It happened that most people were schooling in their same localities. I know of primary schools where learning from class 1 to, I think, class 5, they did learning in their mother tongue. So I remember asking, so how do you do geography? But somehow they would manage. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that in schools, they would also teach in vernacular, and I've seen this debate online where people are wondering, should we then, so it's two, teach vernacular in schools, and then the second option is teach in vernacular in our schools. And what do you make of those two approaches?
UNICEF, in 2016, UNICEF attempted to launch vernacular in the school curriculum, but it didn't kick off. And I attribute this to several factors. One, in our towns and cities, we are metropolitan. So it's like if you choose to do vernacular in a town school, which vernacular do you pick on?
Yeah, exactly.
So it would be very difficult for most towns and cities to embrace vernacular, in the sense that you can't pick a standard one and it will be like the Tower of Babel, where you're not communicating. So it's a bit hard. That is in the school's setup. At home, if your parents are not speaking it, then it will be very hard, because charity begins at home. We are not speaking it at home. We are not speaking it in church. So in the school setup, it would present a problem. Even in our villages, people have relocated. You go to the interiors, we still have communities that were not originally settling there, people buying land and relocating. So it would present a big problem, in my view.
You know, and I'm curious, Mariga, when you think about a national language or the language in which business is conducted here, you'd say, okay, it's mainly English, then of course maybe Swahili after that.
Yeah.
And I remember reading an article where they said, because we give such prominence to those languages, particularly English, it gives the idea that knowledge comes from the outside, right? So even if you're in a Francophone country and you kind of hold speaking French in high esteem as opposed to vernacular mother tongue, you feel knowledge or anything else comes from the outside in. And so there's this hierarchy of languages, if you will, in African countries. Would you say that is a problem in people embracing mother tongue that much more because they feel, well, you know, when it comes to administrative or the national or business language, it's English, and then maybe Swahili, so I shouldn't probably need to. What do you make of that kind of thinking?
It is. Back to when I was a kid and you're in Nairobi, if you spoke with a vernacular accent in some sort, you were mocked thoroughly. Yeah. It was a joke. Now, as an adult, I'm like, what are we doing? You just, it seems funny thinking back at it, but it's that strong, it's that pervasive. There's a hierarchy, and one of the bigger questions usually around learning your own language is power. Because there is a reason why during colonialism, the British literally came and broke people and broke languages completely. Things like the Agikuyu had a full alphabet outside of any other language, which they broke and disappeared. There's power in language and finding identity. The problem is that at a certain point now, we don't feel like it's powerful enough. And also, in a situation where we're metropolitan and we've moved, it brings even more fundamental questions as to what's your vernacular language to begin with.
Yeah.
Right? I don't speak Kikuyu, I don't speak Kamba, I never have. I've lived in Nairobi all my life. I speak English and Kiswahili. Would it be false to say that Kiswahili is my vernacular language? Because we're still stuck at your vernacular language being your mother tongue, and even that is not true. Because every time someone says mother tongue, they refer to the father's tongue.
Oh, yeah.
Because we also go mother tongue, yes, it's this, but it's never what your mother actually speaks, because she was expected. She was expected to come and learn the language from where the father came from. And so there is a hierarchy of languages, but it gets complicated by the movement. Italian universities, I think back in 2015, switched from teaching primarily in Italian to in English, which became a discussion. It was a very hot discussion because for the longest time in Italy, they taught in Italian. And their argument was that the economic viability of the language, eventually they're disadvantaging their own students by teaching them primarily in Italian. But that's part of the argument that's been had in places like Tanzania.
Yeah.
Where it does work, but some of the problems I've seen my Tanzanian friends going through, especially if they learned in that system, the things like if you worked in to transfer whatever skills you have to a different country sometimes needs another additional year or two of training. It basically sets you behind countries which speak English fluently. Unfortunately, we were taught in many ways that your tribe is a negative thing. And so when people talk about being proud of ethnicity, but people confuse that with negative ethnicity and it's all its connotations, and people can't see the effects of it so people confuse that with learning the language. And so it becomes a problem of how to try and separate the two things, if it will be possible. Because I think we might be beyond the space and time where we'd teach in vernacular, mostly because of history and how history has played out, especially when it comes to tribalism and negative ethnicity and how it's been, weaponized against people, especially politically. And so now it's an extremely testy topic. Nairobi might tend to be neutral ground in some senses, but in many of these other places, language, how you speak determines how people treat you many times. When people ask you what your name is, and you say your name is John, they're like, no. What's your name?
Yes. Right.
That question is meant to ask you where you come from, because where you come from determines the way in which it will relate to you.
How then, from what Mariga said, do we strike that balance where it becomes an appreciation for your culture, for your people, and not something that isolates or tries to create that hierarchy that we were just talking about among communities and languages? Because it should be a sense of pride when you're speaking to your people in your language. How do you maintain that without it being politicized and used against a community?
I'm looking at a situation where, like Mariga said, we are asking, do we need these languages? Yes, we do. Because one, we need to retain our identity. We need to connect. It's unfortunate that right now we have the young ones who do not have what we call rural areas where schools would close and we are retreating back to the village. So we have no way out but to learn. We have situations where my shags, my upcountry is in Buruburu. Both my parents speak English, Swahili, so the need may not look like it's there. But when we are intentional, we intentionally speak it in our homes, intentionally even enlighten our young ones on the need to connect.
Yeah.
And that will not happen until we change our colonial mentality, because we still have it like English is for the elites. The locals should be speaking Swahili, Sheng, and not English. That one is for the elites.
We could be here forever because it is also a very emotive topic and discussion when you think about it. Mother tongue is related to identity, as we were saying, and culture as well. And you're right, if we do start destigmatizing someone speaking and sounding the way they should, not trying to sound like someone else, we would be a lot better for it, I think. So I hope this discussion kind of keeps us going in terms of how we sound to each other in various fora, and open up the discussion with young people in terms of whether they find this an important thing to do when it comes to mother tongue, and how do you keep and preserve vernacular in the generations that are to come. Thanks for watching, and keep the conversation going on social media, #CitizenWeekend.
All right, let's take a look at some of your feedback. Abdirahman saying, I think there should be pride in speaking mother tongue. Still on Twitter, this one coming in from Reginald Odor. Vernacular is a colonial term intended to demean our languages and exalt the languages of colonizers. Onyango Kevin on Twitter here saying this is very true. Cultural erosion starts from the point where one can't express his or herself in their vernacular language. In town setup, it should be upon the parents to instill their culture. It begins at home. Nduko saying, there exists nothing on earth and elsewhere like a hierarchy of languages. Ngugi erases any and all pretenses that there can be such a hierarchy so elegantly, so powerfully. Thank you for lining up this important and needed discussion. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. On Twitter, JK Wahome saying, there's nothing as sweet as our mother tongue, our heritage. So sad that our generation does not see the need for it. Who is to blame? Really. Thanks for your feedback. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you keep the conversation going on social media. That does it for Citizen Weekend. Thank you for watching. I'm Victoria Rubadiri. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Njoki Shege. Have a lovely evening. One Love is up next. Stay tuned.